Well, I heard of a story of two businessmen that were flying overseas to a conference, and as they were flying overseas to this conference, their plane began to face some trouble, and all of a sudden, engine 1 went out, and then all of a sudden, engine 2 went out, and they crashed in the middle of the ocean in the South Pacific. But luckily for them, there was an island nearby, and they were able to swim to this island and make it. And one of the men began to cry, though, because he didn't have anybody that would come looking for him or anything. No loved ones, no friends, no family, and he was just bummed out, thinking he's going to die on this deserted island all by himself. And the other man just found a palm tree and leaned up against it and decided to take a nap. And so the man that was freaking out went over to his friend and woke him up and was like, "How can you sleep? Like, don't you care that we're going to die on this island alone?" And the calm man that decided to take a nap said, "You know what? I'm not really too worried. You know, I make about $1 million a year, and I tithe regularly to my church. And so if I know my pastor well enough, he's going to come looking for me." You know, there are many people that might be turned off, especially when pastors preach about money or finances. I mean, how many of us have heard someone say, "Well, all they ever want is my money"? Mark Twain even said that once. Once he was so tired of the appeals for money in church that he decided rather than putting anything into the plate, he would try to take a bill whenever the plate would be passed by. And if you've been to our church for any amount of time, you understand that we're pretty low key when it comes to money. We're pretty low key because some people have taken maybe more of a high key approach when it comes to finances. We have a box. You can give in the box. You can support the ministry that way, or you can do it online. But other than that, we don't ever really talk about it. And probably I would say maybe to our detriment, because the Bible does talk a lot about money. But because we go verse by verse and chapter by chapter and book by book through the Word of God, we only cover it when the subject comes up in that section. And we haven't had anything in regards to Esther or Daniel or 1st and 2nd Thessalonians or Philemon, the last few books we've covered the last few years in talking about money, because they didn't broach the subject in those books. And so the last time we talked about finances, I looked it up this last week, was in June of 2017. So it's been a couple of years for us. I mean, we've talked about church business and stuff, but not had a message on money and or finances. Well, this morning, we get to the section in Ecclesiastes that does talk about that. It talks about money. It talks about finances. And rather than, my goal here this morning is not to coax you out of your cash, or to get you to give to the church or anything like that, but rather that we as a church would have a good foundation and a good understanding that money will never bring us happiness. And that money will never be the thing that fulfills and or brings completion to our hearts and our lives. And that's what Solomon talks about today in Ecclesiastes chapter 5. And if anybody could talk about money bringing happiness, it was Solomon. This was a guy that had all the means in the world. He was pulling down like $66 million a year just in the gold he was bringing in. This was a guy that had his throne carved in ivory and then layered with gold on top of it, which I don't understand why you would even need to put gold on top of an ivory throne, but he did. He didn't have silverware. He had goldware, gold forks, gold plates, gold sporks, all kinds of different utensils to use. And what he does is he comes to the conclusion in Ecclesiastes chapter 5 that all of this wealth and all of this idea of money and finances, at the end of the day, it doesn't bring you happiness. That if you look for happiness in it, you will find at the end of the day that it will make you miserable. And so I've titled this morning's message, if you're taking notes, "Money is Meaningless Without Jesus." Money is meaningless without Jesus. And we're going to be looking, are you guys ready? 10 points, all right? 10 points. Don't worry, I'll get you out of here before dinner, all right? I'll get you out of here before dinner. Some of you are like, is he joking? Yes, I'm joking. Tomorrow's President's Day. You probably all have off, so I'll get you out of here before breakfast, okay? We're going to be looking at 10 points. And here's the idea of what the points and the way we're looking at it is more the thought line of if you love money, if that's what you're pursuing, if that's what you're looking for happiness, you're going to find that it's going to lead you to some bad places. And what we'll see here in our points, verse 1 through 7, you'll rob God. Verse 1 through 7, you'll rob God. Our second point, verse 8 through 9, you'll rob others. If you love money, you'll rob others. Verse 10, you will never have enough. Verse 11, you'll attract leeches. Verse 12, you'll not sleep. Verse 13, you'll hurt yourself. Verse 14, you'll not be secure. Verse 15 through 16, you'll leave it all behind. Verse 17, you'll be miserable. And verse 18 through 19, you would be better wise, or it'll be wiser for you to trust in Jesus than to trust in money and or finances. Now, if this is your first time or you haven't been with us in a while, let me just kind of recap and kind of set the scene so we're all on the same page moving in the right direction. I'm sorry that if it's your first time that you're showing up to the one Sunday in 2 years that we're talking about money. But like I said, we only rarely go through it when we come to sections of Scripture that we're covering. We're in the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes in a series that we've titled Meaningless. And the reason why we've titled it that is because Solomon, the writer of this book, what he does is this is his manifesto in trying to find happiness in life. He is looking for happiness in this life, and he tries anything and everything you could imagine, he says in this book, under the sun. In the horizontal plane here on earth, looking for happiness in wine and wisdom and women and wealth and even religion. And he does this on the horizontal plane only to come up at the end that it's all, he uses the word vanity of vanities. That word vanity is used roughly 39 times in this book. And that word vanity simply means meaningless, that it's here one moment and it's gone the next. That you try to find happiness and wisdom and wealth or women or wine or whatever the case might be, and it's there one moment. Yes, it brings pleasure for a time, maybe a season, just short grasp, but then it's gone. It's like a bubble or cotton candy on your tongue. It's there one moment and gone the next. It's meaningless, meaningless, meaningless. And what he does is he comes to the conclusion at the end of this book, kind of spoiler alert, chapter 12, he tells us that at the end, it's only when you have a right relationship with God, when you put God into the mix, when you put God into your life, that you will then find complete happiness and joy and meaning in this life. Take God out of the picture and your life will be empty and futile and meaningless. And what we've done is looked at a few things that Solomon has gone through in the first 5 chapters so far. He's looked at wisdom. He pursued happiness. We looked at him looking at time and saw that time was meaningless without Jesus, because at the end of the day, we were not created for time here on earth, but rather for eternity, because he placed eternity in our hearts. We looked at injustice. We looked at last week, companionship, and how he sought companionship and friendship and relationship and marriage and so on. And that ultimately is meaningless without Jesus. And today, he comes to the point where he talks about wealth and money and finances and where you will be if that is your main pursuit. And so a couple of things before we jump into this text, just to kind of set a groundwork for us about finances in general and money in general. The Bible talks a lot about money. It talks a lot about finances. It talks a lot about investment and hard work and diligent work and the reward that comes in those things. Jesus talked more about finances than probably anyone else in all of Scripture. 1/6 of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are directly related to our relationship with money. And so a couple of truths come out with this. Number one is that money in and of itself is not bad. Money in and of itself is not evil. You've probably heard that saying that the love of money is the root of all evil. That's not in the Bible. It's kind of in the Bible, but not really. Paul, when he wrote Timothy, he tells Timothy that the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. And so if you love money, it can become a root in your life. It's a root of all kinds of evil, but money is neutral. It's not good, it's not bad, it's neutral. You can use money for good. You can use it to support a church, to support a missionary, to feed the poor, the homeless, to help people, so on and so forth. It can also be used for evil. It could be used for bad things, gambling and things like that, to get rid of your money and waste it down the drain. Jesus reiterates this thought line in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. Where he says that no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or else be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth at the same time. So you can't have two masters. You can't love money and love God at the same time. And so as we look at this, the scriptures do tell us there's a lot of rich people in the Bible. There are people that had money and means. Abraham, Solomon here in Ecclesiastes, he had a lot of money. David, King David, Joseph of Arimathea. If you remember Joseph of Arimathea, he was a rich man. He had a tomb that he decided to rent out to Jesus because he knew it was just going to be temporary for a couple of days. And so he let Jesus use his tomb. There's Acts chapter 16. There's a woman by the name of Lydia that has means and resources. So money isn't evil. It's not bad or immoral. It's neutral, and it can be used for good or evil depending on your heart. The second kind of groundwork in this, though, is that God enables you to make money for his glory. Deuteronomy chapter 8 talks about Moses, and Moses said this, "You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant with you." And so in the Bible, a good work ethic and working hard and those types of things are praised, and people who work hard, the diligent, will get rewarded. But notice as we jump into this, Solomon starts out by really telling us that if you love money and that's all you care about and that's all you pursue, there's going to be some consequences to it. And notice the first one. If you love money, you'll rob God. Notice chapter 5, verse 1. Walk prudently when you go to the house of God, and draw near to hear, rather than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they do evil. Do not be rash with your mouth, and let not your heart utter anything hastily before God, for God is in heaven and you on earth. Therefore let your words be few. For a dream comes through much activity, and a fool's voice is known by his many words. And when you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you have vowed. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay. Do not let your mouth cause your flesh to sin, nor say before the messenger of God that it was an error. Why should God be angry at your excuse and destroy the work of your hands? For in the multitude of dreams and many words there is also vanity, but fear God. Solomon has gone through this course where he's looked at the courtroom and injustice, he's looked at the marketplace, and really what Solomon seems to be drawing his eyes on now is the temple. It seems that he's looking at the temple, and if anybody knew about the temple, it was Solomon. Why? Because he designed it and he built it. He was the guy that went forward and was able to produce it and build it. He dedicated it to the Lord. He even said the words that God can't be contained by a building, but it was a place of worship where sacrifices would happen and people would come in and they would pray, and it was a place where people were to go and honor and worship God. Here was the problem. Solomon noticed that people were going there and, well, they were insincere and even hypocritical in their worship. Their acts of worship were insincere and hypocritical. And so he says, man, this place is to be a place of prayer, a place of where the blood is shed, a place where sacrifices are made for sins. The whole experiment was to be a picture pointing towards Jesus. Jesus is now our prescribed place, a person by where sinners can meet God. But what he tells us here is they were going there and they were not sincere in their worship. Listen, as human beings, we were created for worship. We were created to worship the one true God. We were created to worship his Son and the Holy Spirit. And so because we were created for worship, what happens is man sins, man blows it in the garden and decides that he's going to worship himself by saying, well, I will be like God if I eat of that fruit, okay, and worship himself, therefore taking God off of the throne of his heart and putting whatever else he wants to put on the throne of his heart. And this is why Solomon told us a few weeks ago that God created us with a God-shaped hole in our heart where nothing will fill us, only God will fill us. And so what's happened throughout human history is as human beings, we have a propensity to want to worship other things other than God. We will worship relationships. We place relationships on the throne of our heart. We place that sports team on the throne of our heart. We place that person or money or position or power or popularity or whatever it is on the throne of our heart, and we take God off of the throne and we put those things there. And for the believer, God should be the one that we worship truly and always. And yet so many times we have a tendency to take him off the throne and worship whatever else it might be. And so in relation to money, so many times we worship money, we go after money, we pursue money, we work more hours for money, we do all these things for money, and then we neglect the worship of God in that. Martin Luther once said that there are 3 conversions for the believer: the conversion of the heart, the conversion of the mind, and then the conversion of the pocketbook. And so Jesus says, where your heart is, or where your treasure is, there your heart is also. And that's why Solomon starts off, notice he says, walk prudently, or literally guard your steps. Guard your steps. Make sure that your feet are pointed in the direction of the worship of God. So many times our feet are pointed in the direction of something else and not the Lord. And so he's telling us, really, man, your feet show you where your priorities are. Are you worshiping God, or are you worshiping other things? Unless you're moonwalking, your feet are showing you where you're going. And so the question that you have to ask is, are your feet pointed towards the worship of the Lord? Towards the worship of him? This is spiritual currency, you could say. The worship of God is the most important. And that's why whatever you do, wherever you're at, your work, your home, your marriage, make sure that it's for the glory of God and not for a paycheck and not for whatever else it might be. Whatever area of your life, the boardroom, the bedroom, the ballroom, let it be for worship and reverence to the Lord. And so many times our feet are pointed in the wrong direction, which is usually an indication of where our heart is directed. Are you worshiping the Lord? Is he on the throne of your heart? Because if you're pursuing money, means, finances, whatever it might be, you're robbing God of what he deserves, which is worship. He deserves your worship. Alistair Begg put it this way, that every Christian should have an IEA. An IRA isn't a bad idea, an individual retirement account, but an IEA, an individual eternal account, is where you're storing up treasures in heaven. That's the safest and surest investment you can ever make, is in eternal things, not earthly things. And here's the point. When you support a missionary, when you support a church, a ministry that bears fruit, God credits you with the result. It's an investment. You wouldn't invest in a company that ultimately at the end of the day gives you no return, right? You want to invest in the good things. You should have bought Amazon and Google back in 85 or something, because those are going to give you good returns on your investment. And that's the idea here. When you invest in eternal things, when you invest in worship and the worship of the Lord rather than in the things of this world, you're storing up treasures in heaven. You're not robbing God, but you're giving him all the credit and all the honor and all the glory. And he's on the throne of your heart. Wall Street Journal just recently put out an article that said that giving has gone down in mainline denominations, and mainline denominations are cutting budgets and missionary budgets. And they said this points to a weakening of the church in U.S. society. And I would say it's probably the reason why that's happening is because as believers, we are not viewing giving as a honor and or as a blessing and or as an investment in eternal things, but rather as a duty that we just do grudgingly. It's all about how your feet are directed. Are your feet directed towards the things of God or not? Because your feet will show where your heart is. So to rob God of that is not good. On top of that, he also talks about vows. And I don't want to just gloss over this. He does talk about vows, that when you make a vow to the Lord, you got to keep it. He says you got to pay it. He uses a financial term here. You got to pay it. So how many times do we as believers, and I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but how many times do we as believers, when we get into a jam, say, Lord, oh Lord, help me, please, I promise I will go to church every week. Oh, Lord, please, tax return season is coming, and if I just get a certain amount of taxes, I will give you a certain amount. I'll give you 10%. Well, how many times do we do that? Listen, you can't rob God when you make a promise either. He hears our promises. He takes us at our word. That's why Solomon says it's better to not make a vow. Like if you're thinking like, man, if God gets me out of this, I promise to do this, but actually I really don't want to do this. So you know what? As he says, just don't do it. Better to not make a vow. Better to not do that at all. When we rob God of worship and or keeping our word and giving honor that is due to him, we also at the end of the day rob ourselves of spiritual blessings that he wants to give us, eternal investments. And so when all you care about is the almighty dollar or the almighty shekel, right, when that's all you care about, well, you rob God. Notice the second thing that will happen is you'll rob others. Verse 8 and 9, he says, and if you see the oppression of the poor, right? He's talking about finances here, poor, prosperity. There's a difference between the two. When you see the oppression of the poor and the violent perversion of justice and righteousness in a province, do not marvel at the matter, for high official watches over high official, and higher officials are over them. Moreover, the profit of the land is for all, even the king to serve from the field. Solomon kind of leaves the temple and now he looks to City Hall, and what he sees is, he sees high officials that are over high officials, and then there are higher officials over them. And isn't that the case? What he's really saying is the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and he's not saying this is a good thing or a bad thing. What he's just doing is he's making an observation about mankind and humanity. He seems to say, in effect, that poverty is all around us. You're going to see it. So when you see poverty, what does he say? Don't marvel. Don't marvel. Don't be like, this is a shock. I didn't know this was happening. No, don't marvel. Solomon probably, in going to City Hall, saw the abuse of powers of those that were getting richer and richer, because there's high official over high official, and then there's higher officials over them. And he sees poverty around. He's not saying forget about it. He's not saying ignore it. He's not even saying I approve of it. What he is saying is he's making an observation about it. He's looking at human nature. And what he's saying is those officials watch over other high officials. They take care of each other. And Solomon looks at that and he says, man, even these people will rob others. Some people will take advantage of others in order to get more money. Where money that should have gone to the poor and those that are hurting ends up lining the pockets of politicians, or what he says, high officials. And that money should have gone to help people. He's not saying it's okay. He's just making an observation. Jesus made the same observation. Jesus said that the poor you'll have with you always. Again, he's not approving of poverty. He's just making the observation that you'll always have poor with you. And so the Christian, the believer, should try their best to do something about it. We have a unique opportunity as believers to love the poor and to help those that are hurting and help those that are weak and help those that are facing injustice. Proverbs 31 talks about the virtuous woman who extended her hand to the poor. Paul, when he went out on his missionary journey, the church that sent him out said, whatever you do, do not neglect the poor. And so the point is that Solomon is making is he's making the observation, listen, we live in a fallen world. And because we live in a fallen world, there are going to be officials and people that are going to take advantage of the poor. They're going to take advantage of people. It doesn't mean it's okay, but it's just going to happen. And so when you see this, don't marvel, but rather, as believers, making sure that we do something about it in honoring the Lord, He says in verse 9, kind of connecting it to our brain, not just your feet point the direction of your heart, but connects it to your brain. And he says, Solomon even says, moreover, the profit of the land is for all, even the king is served from the field. What he's saying is at the end of the day, I still need to eat food, and there's still people working the field to get me that food. Or you could say Solomon knew that money was meaningless without grain, because he knew that he needed food from the field. And so notice, people, if they love money, care about money, pursue money, they'll rob God of the worship that he deserves, and they'll even go to the extremes of robbing others and causing people to live in poverty because of it. They'll rob others of their livelihood because their heart and their feet are pointed in the wrong direction. Notice the third thing, he continues that if you love money, verse 10, you'll never have enough. He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. When I think of this verse, I think it kind of the thought line of it takes one to know one, and that's Solomon. Solomon loves silver. The Bible tells us in the book of 1 Kings that Solomon made silver as commonplace in Jerusalem as stones. And so he loved money and silver and finances. But at the end of the day, Solomon knew and understood that God has placed eternity in our hearts, and that money will never satisfy. Money will never be enough. People want more and more and more and more and more. Just think about the gambler, the person that gambles. They gamble and gamble and gamble, and maybe they win a little bit more, and what ends up happening? They use their winnings to put more in to get some more. It's like, well, the city of Vegas. Do you know that only 2% of everybody that goes to Vegas wins? 2%. Meaning this, the economy of the city is based upon 98% of people who lose. And that's because people that even win money, they'll put more money back into the machine. It goes right back in. Why? Because it's never enough. And so that's why, the breakfasts are $2 and the hotels are so cheap and there's not a city tax, because the whole economy is based on losers. 98%. Statistically, those are the right statistics, 98%. And so people come in and they give their wealth away. And so Solomon, he was making a lot of money. He was bringing in a lot. And he tells us at the end of the day, notice he says it's vanity, it's meaningless. You'll never have enough. Ted Turner was once asked, the founder of CNN, was once asked what his favorite million was. And he owns cattle ranches in Montana and a ton of land and Ted's Montana Grill and Buffalo Burgers. Those are amazing. And, all kinds of, different things. And someone asked him what his favorite million that he made was, and his response was interesting. He said, my next million. My next million. Why? Because it's never enough. It's never enough. You want more and more and more. In 1923, a group of the world's most successful financiers met at the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Chicago. And these tycoons, extremely rich guys, controlled more wealth than what was in the U.S. Treasury at the time. And their stories were major successes. Some of them, I'll just name a few. Arthur Cutton was the greatest wheat speculator in America. Albert Fall was the Secretary of the Interior in President Harding's cabinet. Leon Fraser was the president of the Bank of International Settlements. Howard Hobson was the president of the largest gas company. Ivan Kruger was the head of the world's greatest monopoly of match manufacturers. Jesse Livermore was the greatest bear in Wall Street. Charles Schwab was the president of the largest independent steel company, Bethlehem Steel, at the time. Richard Whitney was the president of the New York Stock Exchange. And all these guys had gathered together. They were heavy hitters at the time, and they were considered the models of entrepreneur and business in America. 10 years later, what they didn't see coming in 1923 was 10 years later, or a few years later, but 10 years after that was, of course, the Great Depression and the events that took place in the Great Depression. And this is what happened to them in 1933, 10 years later. Arthur Cutton died abroad, insolvent. Albert Falls served time for misconduct in office and was pardoned from prison so that he could die at home. Leon Fraser committed suicide. Howard Hobson went insane. Ivan Kruger committed suicide. Jesse Livermore committed suicide. Charles Schwab was bankrupt and had to live on borrowed money the last 5 years of his life. And Richard Whitney had recently been released from Sing Sing prison for embezzlement. All of these guys buried beneath the rubble of humiliation and defeat and crime and sickness and financial collapse, all because of the Great Depression. Their wealth and their power and prestige did nothing to help them in this life. And so many people think that fame and fortune, man, when you get that success, listen, it'll never be enough. It'll never be enough. That's what Solomon tells us. His point is you'll never have enough. You'll never be satisfied. Notice our next point. You'll also not just not have enough, but you'll also attract leeches. Verse 11, it says, when goods increase, notice he says, they increase who eat them. So what profit have the owners except to see them with their eyes? Solomon tells us that money will never satisfy because, well, at the end of the day, it's going to attract a crowd. There's no escaping the fact that when you love money and care for money and pursue money, that, well, people are going to want some of the action. Just think about those that win the lottery. How many stories have you heard of those that win the lottery and all of a sudden they have friends and relatives they didn't even know they had? You know, you're my fourth cousin from Uncle Jim Bob, you know, and you're like, and why? Because they want money. They want a part of the action. Solomon knew this. 1 Kings chapter 4 tells us that Solomon had to feed a lot of people. On a daily basis, he had to have 400 sheep, 300 lambs, 100 oxen, 30 horses, 30 deer, 400 geese, 300 pigeons, 600 small fowl, 3,750 gallons of wine, 75 gallons of fresh milk, and 75 gallons of sour milk just to feed the leeches in his life. And so what does he tell us? He says when goods increase, when you get more money, more means, they increase who eat them. There are people that want some of the action. They're going to mooch off of you. And it's not just those relatives you didn't know you had. Now guess who else you have? You've got accountants and attorneys and all kinds of other people that you've got to pay to take care of things. And so there's a lot of mouths to feed. And so Solomon says if you try to find happiness in money, you're just going to attract a bunch of mooches. On top of that, you're not going to sleep. So I mean, it's just getting better, right? It's just getting better. Notice verse 12. The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. The Living Bible puts it this way. The man who works hard sleeps well, whether he eats a lot or a little, but the rich man must worry and suffer insomnia. The more you have, the more you have to worry about things. The more you have to manage, the more taxes you have to pay, the more you have to worry about. Someone once said that having money is like holding on to an electrical wire. The more the juice, the harder the grip. And so what he does is he kind of paints this picture. Like, imagine the guy. There's just a guy. He clocks in at work, he does his job, he goes home, kisses his wife, wrestles with his kids, eats dinner, sits down to watch the evening news, falls asleep on the couch, wakes up, and that's his day again. And for him, he's able to sleep. Why? Because there's not a ton of pressure, not a lot going on. But the rich, they're occupied with their pursuits and lawsuits and financial entanglements and future installments and all those things. And I know what some of us are probably thinking, like, Fernando, you don't, listen. If I had $1 million in the bank, I would sleep like a log. You don't know what you're talking about. You're right, I don't know because I've never seen $1 million. But Solomon does. And Solomon has experienced this. John D. Rockefeller, his name often comes up when people talk about wealth. John D. Rockefeller, at the age of 53, was the only billionaire in the world at the time. 53 years of age, the only billionaire. And you would think that his life was just amazing, that he had filet mignon and lobster dipped in butter and Ted's Montana Grill, buffalo burgers, and all kinds of good stuff every night. No. At the age of 53, being the only billionaire in the world, he suffered from gut issues that his daily meal was milk and crackers, even though he could afford everything. And it wasn't until someone told him, because he was always worried about his health, it wasn't until someone told him that he should give his money away, and that was a turning point in his health. He got better once he started giving all of his money away, that he lived to the age of 98. Solomon warns us that money doesn't bring peace. It doesn't bring peace. It doesn't bring rest. You'll not sleep. On top of that, you'll hurt yourself. You'll poke your eye out or shoot your eye out. You'll shoot your eye out, okay? Verse 12 or 13, notice he says, there is a severe evil which I have seen under the sun, riches kept from their owner to his hurt. You'll hurt yourself. Solomon observed this wealth and rather than looking at it and thinking like, oh man, I got all this wealth and it's great and I'm healthy and everything's fun. No. He says it ends up leading to someone's hurt. I mean, you could probably have heart attacks from this. And just think about that. Isn't that the case our day and age? Think about 2008, 2009 when the economy and the stock market, and I know tons of people that lost a lot of their retirement account because of it. And now people watch the stocks, and what happens when it goes up? Oh, okay, everything's good. And then it goes down. Oh no, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And then it goes up and it goes down, and it's just these heart palpitations that keep on happening because we're so worried about the stock market going up and down. And Solomon tells us, man, at the end of the day, these things, you're going to hurt yourself. Riches are sometimes hoarded to the harm of the Savior or the saver. And so this is the reason why you've got to have a light touch on money. Money is a good servant, but a poor master. And so hoarding doesn't help you, it hurts you. It ends up hurting you. And just think about that. Think about the person that hoards. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but how many of us have our basement filled with stuff we haven't seen in like 8 years? And on top of that, then we got stuff in the garage. And then a couple of us maybe have some storage units down at the local YOULL storage place. Why? Because we have all this stuff. But at the end of the day, what's going to happen? You're going to die, and your kids are going to have to clean out that storage unit. And they're going to have to take care of it. Listen, the Bible is clear that a joyful life is a generous life, not a stingy one. If we live our lives with clenched fists holding on to things, well, guess what? God can't put anything into a clenched fist. But if we live our lives like this with an open hand, God can put things into it, and that also means God can take things out of it. And then he can put some more into it and take it out. You only hurt yourself. Notice verse 14 on top of that, you'll not be secure. He says, but those riches perish through misfortune. When he begets a son, there is nothing in his hand. This is kind of the foolishness of holding on to wealth. Wealth can disappear suddenly through misfortune. Bad business moves, pyramid schemes, gambling. In fact, statistics say that within 2 years of leaving professional football, 78% of players are bankrupt and or in financial crisis. Within 2 years, we're talking NFL guys that make a ton of money, even if it's just a base salary. A base salary, I think, in the NFL is like $500,000 for the year. And within 2 years, 78% of them are bankrupt or facing financial crisis. Why? Because misfortune, things happen. At the end of the day, you're not secure. And then he even tells us that who begets a son, there's nothing in his hand. If you have rich, let's just say, grandparents, stats tell us that 60% of families waste away their wealth by the second generation. And by the end of the third generation, it's at 90% of families have little or nothing that their grandparents left them. So just think about that. Solomon says at the end of the day, it's not secure. It's not secure. You're not going to be able to grasp onto it. Notice our next point, verse 15 through 16. At the end of the day, you're going to leave it all behind. As he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return, to go as he came, and he shall take nothing from his labor which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a severe evil. Just exactly as he came, so shall he go. And what profit has he who has labored for the wind? At the end of the day, you die and you don't take any of it with you. When Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, died, he was worth roughly $10 billion. And when he died, you know how much money he took with him? Zero. Not a penny. And it's often that saying, like you've heard the saying, like, you've never seen a hearse carrying a U-Haul, right? You've never seen a hearse carrying a U-Haul. And then, of course, some sarcastic person in our church sent me this not too long ago. So, well, that ruins the illustration. But here's the thought line. I mean, the premise and the thought line is still the same. You've never seen a hearse carrying a U-Haul. I mean, you have now, but the idea is that you can't take it with you. You can't take any of it with you. Once you die, it's over. Once you die, it's over. If you look at a dollar bill, this is all I had in my wallet, so sad. If you look at a dollar bill, on the back of it, there's an eagle. Why is there an eagle? Because we're America. No. Proverbs tells us why. It says, do not overwork to be rich because of your own understanding and how it ceases. Will you set your eyes on that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly away like an eagle toward heaven. Money talks, you've heard the saying, and all it's ever said to me is goodbye. Because the eagle. I don't know if that's really why they put it on the dollar, but I thought it was a good illustration. Proverbs says that it makes itself like wings and flies away like an eagle, riches does. You can't take any of it with you. If you remember in the book of Luke, there was a guy who had a bumper crop. And he had all kinds of crop that was available for that season. And he said, man, you know what? I got to tear down all my old barns, and I've got to build bigger barns to house all my crop. And the Lord speaks to him and says, you fool, your soul is required of you tonight. You're going to build these bigger barns for no reason and no purpose because you're going to die tonight. At the end, if you love money and try to find happiness in it, at the end of the day, you leave it behind. And not just that, notice our next point, you'll be miserable. Verse 17, all his days he also eats in darkness, and he has much sorrow and sickness and anger. The pursuit and love of money, you'll end up lonely. Notice, he says you eat alone in darkness. How sad is that? I mean, you care so much about money that you end up in a place where you're just alone and eating. And I know some of us might be thinking like, you know what? That sounds 10 times better than my life right now. No, because you end up lonely. And not just that, but there's sickness and sorrow. How many times do you see those that end up just super sick or have lost it because of their money and or means and or finances? I mentioned this last week. Howard Hughes ended up just crazy because of his money. And you end up in a place where you're lonely. You have no one to share the wealth. You're sorrowful, sick, and angry. It's like the story I heard of a guy by the name of Robert who had never been married. He lived at home with his elderly father, and his mom had passed away years earlier, and his father was sick and near death, and his father was rich. And his father told Robert, you're going to be lonely living in this big house by yourself. You need to go find yourself a wife to keep you company. And so Robert did that. He went down to the singles bar. He spotted a woman whose beauty took his breath away. He went up to her and said, right now I'm just an ordinary man, but in a month or two, my father's going to pass away. I'm going to inherit over $20 million. And the woman gladly went home with Robert, and he introduced her to his father. And 4 days later, she got married and became Robert's stepmother. And you end up lonely. Some of you are getting the joke now, okay? And so what Solomon is saying is at the end, it doesn't bring happiness. You end up miserable. So where's the hope? Like, where's the hope? What do we do? Well, I would say this. You would be wise to trust in Jesus. Notice what he says in verse 18. Here's what I've seen. He's like, at the end of the day, this is the point. It is good and fitting for one to eat and drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life which God gives him. For it is his heritage. As for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth and given him power to eat of it, to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor, this is a gift from God. For he will not dwell unduly on the days of his life, because God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. This is what he says at the end of it. If you're going to labor and you're going to work and you're going to live 9 to 5 and you're going to do those things, at the end of the day, riches aren't going to bring happiness, so might as well enjoy the gift that God has given you under the sun. Enjoy this life. Rather than living for wealth, busy accumulating wealth, notice verse 20, be busy for God. Be busy for the Lord. Enjoyment is a gift from God. Learn to enjoy those things, the simple things. Learn to laugh a little bit more. And this might not sound real biblical or real spiritual, but some of us should lighten up, loosen up, enjoy life, enjoy the things that God has given you. Stay away from the idea of the grass is greener on the other side. You know why the grass is greener on the other side? Because there's more manure on the other side. There's more poo on the other side that you have to deal with. So rather than living our lives in light of, oh, no, I want that. Why do they get that? Why don't I have that? Just enjoy the life that God has given you. Enjoy it and enjoy the gift, he says. The Bible says to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. It's easy to weep with those who weep. When someone's hurting and they've lost a loved one or something's going on, it's easy to do that. But when someone is blessed and they're rejoicing, do we? Well, why does my neighbor get a new car? I need a new car. God, why don't I have a new car? Rather than grumble and complain, say, man, I'm so stoked that you got a new car. Can I smell it? I mean, new car smells are awesome, aren't they? New car smells? I mean, man, just rejoice with them. Be excited for them. That's what the Lord is saying. Enjoy the gift. May this be our motto, that God keeps him busy, that God keeps our hearts full and busy for him. Hebrews 13:5 says, let your conduct, your lifestyle be without covetousness. What that means is, I want that, or I don't have that, or I should have that. They don't deserve that. No, let your conduct, your lifestyle be without that. Look at what you have rather than what you don't have. Think about, Jesus. He says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then all these things will be added unto you. When your heart and your feet are pointed in the direction of God and worshiping him, that's when everything else will come into play. Focus on the gift that God has given you, this life. And really, if we focus on the gifts, well, more than the giver, we become guilty of idolatry. If we accept the gifts but complain about them, we're guilty of ingratitude. And if we hoard the gifts and not share them with others, we're guilty of indulgence. But if we give our lives to his will and his glory, then we can enjoy this life and be satisfied. As we close, 3 things to take from this morning's message that I think Solomon really just wants to drive home for us when it comes to money and finances and resources. Number 1, misuse leads to misery. Remember, money, the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, but money in itself is not evil. Solomon tells us that if you're looking for happiness in money, you're going to be disappointed. Money in itself is not bad, but misuse will lead to misery. Money can open up a lot of things, and if we're not careful, the temptations that money can buy can entrap us to do immoral things. That's why James tells us that every man is tempted when he is drawn away by his own lust and enticed. And when lust has conceived, it brings forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, brings forth death. And so as we think about money, listen, misuse can lead to misery. The love of money. People will sell drugs for money. People will sell their bodies for money. People will kill for money. People will steal for money. The businessman will neglect his family for money. Dreamers will lose friends and money by gambling it away. As we think about those things, money isn't evil, but it can be used for evil. And so making sure that we have a light touch and that we use the means that God has blessed us with for his kingdom rather than our own selfishness. Misuse will lead to misery. It'll lead us down a bad path. Think of just everything we talked about. You'll attract leeches. You'll not be able to sleep. It's going to lead to all of these bad things. Number two, I would say this: when it comes to money and or finances, we need to have the right perspective on it, or allow money and have a right view of money. And I've used this before, but I'm going to use it again. It's in the way of give, Give. And I'm not saying that you give to the church or anything like that, but what I'm saying is that we live our lives with a generous heart, with an open-handed idea and lifestyle, so that God can put in and then we can give away. So Give, when you view money this way. Number one, G, that God owns everything. God owns everything. He owns, not that we, well, you know what, God, I'm going to give you 10% and then I'm going to keep my 90%. No. God, in his graciousness, owns 100% and he lets you keep 90 of it. Okay? So, G, God owns everything. Number two, invest in eternal things. Invest in eternal things. Not earthly things, but in heavenly things. 3, G-I-V, value God more than money. Value God more than money. Worship him. Be imitators of the Lord. Give everything up to him. And number 4, engage your heart in the right things. Philippians 4 says, and my God will meet your needs according to his glorious riches in Christ Jesus. Engage your heart in the right things. And lastly, and we'll close with this, we need to remember, when it comes to money and finances, what we keep, we will ultimately lose. What we keep, we will ultimately lose. Solomon tells us that at the end of the day, we leave it all behind. And so what's the point in accumulating wealth and storing it up and having all of this? I'm not saying that we be foolish and reckless and by any means, but what I am saying is, remember, what we store up here on this earth, we're going to leave behind. So might as well live our lives in a way that we're pursuing the things of heaven and pursuing eternal things. Remember, your Amazon password stays here when you die. It stays here. Naked I came, he says. Naked I shall return. And so the thought line is, we should invest in things that won't be lost. And the greatest investment, at the end of the day, the greatest investment you can make is not with what you do with your finances. It's not even what you do with your friends or your family or what you do with your church. The greatest investment at the end of the day is what you do with your soul. Where's your soul? Listen, Jesus loved you so much that he would send his one and only son to come to this earth and die on the cross because he loved not just you, but your soul as well. He wants every part of you. And it's easy for us to make plans with retirement accounts, and it's easy for us to make plans with even maybe trying to store up something in heaven and so on and so forth. But if you haven't dealt with your soul, then I would say you're being really reckless and foolish. And so my hope and my prayer is that today you would give your heart and your life to Jesus if you've never given your heart and your life to him. That you would make an eternal investment in heaven, because God loves you so much that he wants to have a relationship with you. And that you will never fill your heart and your soul with the things of this world. It's only going to be filled by the God-shaped hole in your heart that Jesus fits right on into. And so if you give your heart to him, I guarantee it's the greatest investment you'll ever make. Let's pray. Heavenly Father,